David, tonight, I think the first time that just to have the Shir and Maimon Beach to come and give a Shir, give the very chizuk, the very Torah for the Olam, and he has many Talmidim throughout years of teaching, and then now becoming a yeshiva, and many of us in Mitzvah we'll be able to be Zoche now to become Shadol Talmud. We'll hear a little bit of the Torah. Big schos. Thank you very much for taking time before these busy times to come and give the Torah to the Olam, and it's a cover to call everybody's wife to be Manhana.
So this is my first time in this Kolom, in this building. I have had the zechus and the pleasure to many times discuss and hear Rabbi Bleisher and discuss things with him, and Hashem, I see how much he's been mashpil over here. Rabbi Singer also, I've known for a number of years. I thank them both for inviting me here to speak. Tonight, I guess it's on the flyer that we're going to be discussing the mitzvah of Zechiras Maamed Sinai. So every sitter after Shachris, you have Sheish Zechiras, 6 things that we're supposed to remember. 6 times the Torah says to remember different things. So one of them is the mitzvah of Zechira, the Zechira of Maamed Sinai. And they bring on that the pasuk or psukim, Raki Shamlecha Shmar Nafshecha Ma'oid, psukim in Parashat Va'aschanon. The person has to guard himself. Pentishkach es advar masherah einecha fin yasur miluvavcha kol yimei chayecha v'datnu l'necha v'levonecha. Next pasuk is Yoyim Asher Marach B'tnei Hashem Elokecha B'chayir. So the Torah is saying that we have to be very careful never to forget the things that we saw. And what are those things? Yoyim Asher Marach B'tnei Hashem Elokecha B'chayir is the day that we stood in front of Kadosh Baruch Hu. We got the Torah. Okay, Magen Avraham brings in Hilchos Kriya Shema, he brings that when a person is saying Avarabba, you should have in mind, this is the one of the Charta, you should have in mind, this is the Chira of Matan Torah, when he says the Kira of Tanu, you should have in mind, Maamed Sinai. So he asks over there, why is it they have Sheish Zechiros, and only one of them, well, one of them is Yitzias Mitzrayim, which we have a mitzvah twice a day to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim, but of the other 5, we only have one of them, which is Amalek, that Chazal or Kaveh, like a special chiyuv, have a Shabbos where everybody gets in lane Parsha Zachar. The other ones we don't have. He goes through. He says the reason by Maamed Sinai where we don't have Chazal weren't Kaveh, they didn't make a Shabbos of Zechiras Maamed Sinai is because we have Shavuos, and Shavuos is already a day that we have. Maamed Sinai, it's like Shabbos, we don't need a special day to remember Shabbos, but we have Shabbos, so too, we don't need a special day to be kind this day because we have Shavuos. It seems that the Magen Avraham is saying that every Shavuos, the person is, the opportunity to be in the kind is meant to be in the kind this, even if he doesn't do the Zechiras after davening, but he's meant to be in the kind this mitzvah of Zechiras Maamed Sinai every Shavuos. Now what's the makor for this whole mitzvah? Where does it come from? The Magen Avraham is not the I'm bringing the makor for the mitzvah. So the makor, he says the Moyam mitzvahs bring it. So we're just going to discuss the Ramban. The Ramban has a section in his Hasagos on the Sefer HaMitzvahs. He has a list of all the mitzvahs that the Rambam forgot. There's the Shichas HaEsen after Mitzvah Aseh. The Rambam lists all the Mitzvah Aseh. And the Ramban writes which ones the Ramban forgot. The Ramban writes which ones the Rambam forgot. And then after the Mitzvah Aseh, he has the Shichas HaLavin. And he writes the Lavin that L'daitoi, the Rambam forgot. I mean, the Rambam didn't count. He didn't forget because they both come up with the number 613. But L'daitoi, the Rambam should have brought this mitzvah. And he says, brings these psukim, Yisham Lecha Shmar Nafshecha Ma'oid, and he brings that this is a lav to not forget Maamed Sinai. Similarly, he says in his Perush on the Torah, so he explains what the psukim are doing. Over there he actually says, some ha'ara I'm not going to discuss, but he actually says over there, that's a lav and an aseh. And the Hasagos on the Rambam, he only says that it's a lav, it's not in the Shechas HaEsen, he doesn't bring this as an aseh. You have pen tishkach, right? You have the Yisham Lecha, the Yisham pen va'al, whenever he uses that lashon is a lashon of a lav. So you have the Hishamer, and then you have Vaydatnu L'Nechel Le'V'Nechel, which is the Chayra and Asay. But in his Perish on the Torah, he calls it an Asay, and the Sefer Mitzvahs he doesn't discuss. But that's the way the Ramban understands these psukim. Then the Ramban says like this. He says, "V'hakavana b'zeh, Yudai l'noi." The purpose of this mitzvah is a tremendous importance to this mitzvah. And he basically quotes the Rambam to explain the importance of the mitzvah. The Rambam in Perek Ches of Yisod HaTorah basically says exactly the same thing. The Ramban is quoting him. The idea being that why is Ma'amad Har Sinai? Why is our mitzvah? We have to remember Ma'amad Har Sinai. What are we supposed to remember? The flowers. What are we meant to remember from Ma'amad Har Sinai? He says the remembering of Ma'amad Har Sinai is very important because that is when Klal Yisrael heard directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking directly to Moshe Rabbeinu and giving over the Torah. And through that seeing and hearing, through what Klal Yisrael saw over there, it became clear to them, became pashut to them, and obvious to them that the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, his what was makabel from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is coming directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was nothing from Moshe, but Moshe Rabbeinu was just hearing it directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this idea that Torah is min hashamayim, right? The foundation of the emunah that Torah is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the fact that we saw it with our own eyes and we heard it with our own ears. We heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him say directly that Klal Yisrael heard it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rambam brings on that. That the nation should hear when I'm speaking to Klal Yisrael, and through that they're going to believe in Moshe Rabbeinu forever. So this is a big yesod that the Rambam explains that is different than any other Navi. Never had this. No other Navi could have it. Other Nevi'im can make oisos. They can make signs. They can say, like raya. Believe me what I'm saying because this is going to happen. And the ice will come and people will believe. No, that's halacha that they believe in Navi because he makes an ice. There are exceptions, but in general, that's halacha. But he says, Amunah in such a Navi, he says, is not a great Amunah. He says, it's not a permanent Amunah. He says, there's always a room for doubt. Maybe he did the ice with Kishuf. Right? Maybe he used witchcraft to make this ice. But he says, the only thing that can't be denied is something that you see, you hear, you witness, Amish right in front of you. That's something which is an emunah which can never be denied. So the Rambam is of course one of the Yud Gimel Yikarim of the Rambam, and he says it over there also. This Nekuda that everybody has a chiyuv to believe that Torah Moshe is the Torah from the beginning to the end. That's the Torah, nothing else, can't be changed. If a Navi comes later on and he says. There's no Isur of Chil Shabbos, or there's no Chelev, or there's no. We don't believe him because we already heard directly from Moshe Rabbeinu what the Torah is, and we know that Moshe Rabbeinu heard everything from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because we saw that. Okay, so l'chayra would seem that even though the Rambam holds that this is an ikr, this is one of the things that we're mechuyev to believe, but nevertheless, there's no asay, there's no lav, there's no specific mitzvah that we have to do something to remember it, to focus on it. It's just something we need to know. Like Chiyas HaMesim, we have to know, but there's no lav as far as I know. There's no lav, no asay, that we have to do something to remember, to know that we should believe in Chiyas HaMesim. We just have to believe it. So here too, you have to believe it, but it's not an asay or a lois asay. That's what it would seem that the Rambam would hold. The Rambam doesn't, when he brings all of this about the emunah and nevuas Moshe, he never mentions anything about the pasuk of Vaydatnu L'Nechel Le'V'Necha Yom Asher Marta. That's not neged to that. The only pasuk he brings over there, one of the only psukim, is the pasuk of Gam B'Chol Yaminu La'Olam, which he says is a new type of emunah that goes forever because it has no makom for any doubts to come in. So now, what does the Rambam tackle hold? What does he do with the other psukim? What does the Rambam understand? Because why doesn't he count it in the mitzvah? Why doesn't he bring the pasuk says so and that in Megillas Esther, the Perush on the Rambam, the Sefer Mitzvahs, he says that the Rambam doesn't count it because he holds that pasuk is not referring to specifically teaching your children and not forgetting Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's going on all of Torah. Really, the pasuk before, really a few pasukim before. The pasuk right before is the Migai Gadol Asher Lo Chukim Umishpatim Tzadikim B'Chol HaTorah Azois Asher Anoich Noisim Lefnechem Hayonim. Right, B'Chol HaTorah Azois, and then the next pasuk is Raki Shomer L'Chal Shmonav Shlomoy Petishkach Azadavar. So understands that it's going back on the pasukim before. The pasukim before are talking about all of the Torah, and the Torah is saying, be careful not to forget the Torah. And this is the way Rashi also learns the pasuk. So it's not just the Rambam. The way Rashi learns over there, he says, and the pasuk Raki Shomer L'cha says, "Oz kishaloi tishkechu oisam v'tasim al v'tastem techashu chachamim nevoinim." It's talking about the whole Torah. When you do the mitzvahs, if you don't forget them, you do the mitzvahs properly, you're going to be considered chachamim. And it doesn't learn that it's going on Ma'amad Har Sinai specifically. Okay, now it's not only Rashi who learns like that. Every Maimer Chazal that has to do with these Tukim also is always going on all of Torah. It's not going on specifically Ma'amad Har Sinai. For example, we have a Mishnah in Avos. It says that anybody who forgets anything in the Torah, anything that he learned, is Chayav Misa. Because the pasuk says, "Raki Shamer L'Chal Shmor Nafshecha Ma'adik." To guard your life. It's like Shmartim with Nafshei Seichem. It's actually your life. So Pentishkach Esad Devar, right? Then maybe you'll forget. It means forgetting. Not talking about forgetting Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's talking about forgetting anything in the Torah. Like a similar Gemara in Menachos says that the person who forgets something that he learned is Zoyran Alav, and he's also again the same pasuk Pentishkach, the Lashon of Alav. We have another Gemara that says that a Balkari is not allowed to learn Torah because the pasuk says, the next pasuk says, Yom Asher Marta L'fnei Hashem L'kechem L'chayrev. So when you learn Torah, it has to be like Yom Asher Marta, just like over there is Be'ema B'ira B'res V'zer, with fear and awe and trembling. So too, in the future, it also has to be Be'ema B'ira B'res V'zer. Again, it's not talking about Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's talking about meaning. It's talking about all of Torah. The Ramban himself, in this, where he's masik around the Shulchas Alavin, he bavorns a fourth Chazal, for the Gemara in Kedushin. And the Gemara in Kedushin learns out the din that a grandfather has to teach his son's son Torah, right? His son's children he has to teach Torah, because the pasuk says, you have to teach your sons and your sons' sons. So again, that's not a chiyuv to learn, to teach a Ma'amad Har Sinai. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like the Gemara is learning halacha l'maisa. The Gemara is learning that the mitzvah on the grandfather to teach his grandson Torah. So Rabban himself bavorns that kash, and he says, don't make a mistake and think that I'm wrong and that this pasuk is not going on Ma'amad Har Sinai, it's just going on the Torah because of this Gemara in Kedushin. He says, because no, it is going on Ma'amad Har Sinai, but he says, Emunas HaTorah hu al limud HaTorah. It's a little bit vague, but he says, maybe everyone can think about it. What he means to say is that it's mittul tali zeh b'zeh. Means you can't learning Torah without understanding that Torah's min hashemayim is nothing, and not knowing and just learning the Torah min hashemayim without knowing Torah is nothing. So it means that the two things are mittul tali zeh b'zeh. So if the grandfather has to teach his grandson emunas HaTorah, then we can see from there that he also has to teach his grandson Torah. I guess that's what he means. Not so clear what he means. But the Ramban himself did have this side, and I guess that l'chayra would be the machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban is what the pasuk is referring to. Is that the pasuk chat in the pasuk? The pasuk chat in the pasuk teaching you to remember Ma'amad Har Sinai. The pasuk chat in the pasuk is to teach you to remember Torah. Learn Torah, teach Torah, learn Torah. So nothing specifically about Ma'amad Har Sinai. And that would be the end of everything. Except that we have one other Rambam, which the Chayra makes everything very, very difficult. The Rambam in Igeres Teiman, he writes something that you have to check to make sure that it's not the Rambam talking. So I'll read you the Lashon. This is the Rambam in Igeres Teiman. It's a letter that he wrote to the people of Teiman when they were going through difficult times, and he was trying to be mechazik them. And among other things, he was trying to be mechazik them in their emunah. So it says a lot. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's trying to explain how they should be mechazik themselves in their emunah. You have to teach your children that Moshe Rabbeinu was Adon HaNeviim, and the whole Torah from Bereshis until the end is Dibur Me'ez Habari Yisbarach Moshe Rabbeinu. So you have to teach them all of this. And that you can't change anything. Okay, Kamoikin, he says like this. Kamoikin, Zichru Ma'amad Har Sinai. Remember Ma'amad Har Sinai. Shetzivana HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zachar Kamosh. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to always remember Ma'amad Har Sinai. The Gam Ziranim L'Shavah says, like the Ramban and Chumash, he holds us an Asay and a Lois Asay. The Torah's mitzvah was to remember it all the time, and he told us not to forget it. And he told, his mitzvah was, he commanded us to teach it to our children, so that they should grow up with this knowledge, with knowing that something happened called Ma'amad Har Sinai. Now, who Mashen Nemar? This is a pasuk. Raki Shamar L'cha Shmona Shchomoy. Same pasuk we discussed from the beginning. Tishkach Sadom Asher Nechol Nisum L'Locha Kol Mechayecho Etal Nechol Nechol Yom Hashemat. The Mamish is word for word come out from the Ramban in the Ramban and the Sefer HaMitzvos. So the way we've been explaining it is that the Rambam holds that this took on nothing to do with Ma'amad Har Sinai. The Megillah Esther is explaining it the way it seems. The Rambam actually holds it. The Rambam actually also paskins that says a Lashon, until when is a person chayav to learn Torah? Until when is a person chayav to learn Torah? Until the day that he dies, because the pasuk says, "Ufen yasur milvavcha kol yemei chayacha," and any time that you stop learning, you're going to forget. So you see again clear. The Rambam Lahalacha is paskining that the psukim are referring to learning Torah, and yet in the Geras Teiman, seems that he changed his mind, but he seems mamish to say exactly like the Ramban. The story, and I guess I would try to figure out what year he wrote it and why he changed his mind. Maybe he changed his mind, but I'm not. So I'm not going to get into that possibility. So I'm going to bring now from another part of the Geras Teiman where I think he also says something also very difficult to understand, but I think it gives us a way to understand how the Rambam understood these psukim. It's a very simple question. We have a pasuk that talks about Lav, Tishkach Sadvar Mashiro Einacha, and Isur of Forgetting. Is it going on Kol HaTorah? Is it going on everything? Or is it going specifically on Ma'amad Har Sinai? That's the stira that we have in the Rambam. Okay, so earlier in the Geras Teiman, again, he's trying to mechazik them, and he's trying to explain all the tzaras that are happening, all the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to challenge everyone's emunah as a way for people to be able to prove their emunah. That's really the Ramban actually brings in Chumash from the Rambam also the pasuk by Matan Torah. It says Levavur Nasois Eschemba. They learn Nasois, not quite sure what it means, but they learn that Nasois is a lashon of Nisayon. That in order to test you, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu made Matan Torah in order that in the future you could test them. Right? See it, all the generations always tested in many different ways. Look now there's mamish Yechidim who actually really believe in terms of the population of the world and science, everything. It's like how many people are actually. I mean, there's not that many of us left. It's where we're constantly tested. So that's why we have to come back to this Ma'amad Har Sinai. So that's the Rambam is discussing over there, and he says like this: "Kfar hiftichanu habari yisparach." Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us a haftacha. The Daivon of Arvusai. Kadosh Baruch Hu is like an orev, like a guarantor, and he's a good guarantor. Kadosh Baruch Hu, pretty good. That anybody who stood on Har Sinai, that will believe in the Nevuos Moshe Rabbeinu no matter what happens. Whatever Nisayon they're going to have, they stood on Har Sinai, they're going to maintain their emunah. They're not going to be shaken by whatever shmad, whatever circumstance happens, it's not going to affect them. It's Kadosh Baruch Hu is guaranteeing that. Not only them, but also all of their future daughters, all their children, grandchildren. Hashem is coming to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu in order that the nation should hear when Kadosh Baruch Hu speaks. The Ram is saying the Gam B'Choy Yamin Olam is not just Kadosh Baruch Hu saying that I'll do this in order that they should have emunah in you. He's saying it's haftacha. The Gam B'Choy Yamin Olam is haftacha from Kadosh Baruch Hu that Klal Yisrael, that the descendants of the people who are Omer al Har Sinai are going to have an unshakable faith in Nevuas Moshe. And so, you should know, anybody who doubts Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, hard to understand exactly what he means. He's not descended from Zatocha. So if you don't believe, it means that your parents didn't stand by Har Sinai. Chazal also said that the fathers never stood on Har Sinai. Okay, so exactly how to understand what that, and that's meant to be taken literally or not literally. The fathers never stood on Har Sinai. But it's hard to understand what does it mean. It means that if my parents were by Har Sinai, so that somehow makes me a Maimon. Either I know about Matan Torah and I believe in Matan Torah, or I don't believe in Matan Torah. But if I believe in Matan Torah, then I'll have Emunah. If I don't believe in Matan Torah, then I'm not going to have Emunah l'chayr. And then, right, there's a haftacha that anybody who stood on Har Sinai, their children are going to have Emunah, an unshakable faith in the Emunah Satayra. So then, what's the need for everything that the Rambam talks about? That you have to teach your children. It's like one page later in the Ger statement, he says you have to make sure to stress to your children everything about Matan Torah. What's the point? There's Haftacha. Kadosh Baruch Hu is an Arif. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us a guarantee that if I stood on Sinai, then my child is going to have Emunah. So what do I have to teach him anything for? So what you see from the Rambam. And this is really the Nekudas HaMachloekes between the Ramban and the Rambam. It's not a it's a very small Machloekes. The Ramban is basically saying that the Pasuk is talking about Emunah Satayra, and the Rambam is basically saying that the Pasuk is talking about Emunah Satayra. Ramban somehow understands that it also, he says Emunah Satayra is Limud HaTorah, and the Rambam is saying that really the Pasuk is also Limud HaTorah. What exactly is the Nekudah? How is the Rambam exactly understanding the Pasuk? They're very posh. The way the Ramban is understanding the way that the Emunah is transmitted or is given over to the future generations is that we, the people who stood by Har Sinai, saw something and they got this very firm belief, and then they passed it down through their children and their children's children, and then so they have that knowledge of what happened now, and they know to believe it. Maybe what the Kuzari discusses, that it would be very difficult for anybody to make up such a story, or maybe just because they believe the derech is to believe what your parents tell you. So they're going to have that belief because they're aware of Maimon Har Sinai. So it's the knowledge of Maimon Har Sinai which creates the Emunah in the Nevuas Moshe. Because the knowledge of Maimon Har Sinai is that they saw Kadosh Baruch Hu speak to Moshe, and then I heard that from my father. So I know that Kadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. So I know that Kadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, then I have Emunah. But what the Rambam is saying is that the real Emunah doesn't come from the knowledge and the idea of Maimon Har Sinai. It comes from being by Maimon Har Sinai, from standing and being by part of the Maimon Har Sinai. That's where the Emunah comes from. The Emunah is not just the knowing that the Maimon Har Sinai. When they saw and they heard what they saw and they heard, and they see that Kadosh Baruch was speaking directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. So they got this Emunah. That's a Metzias, that when you see something, you believe it, and that Emunah became ingrained in them, and it becomes part of the nature of Klal Yisrael, becomes something which is inherent to Klal Yisrael, and it gets automatically transmitted from generation to generation. Meaning the Maimon Har Sinai, not the knowledge of Maimon Har Sinai, but the Maimon itself is where Emunah HaTorah is meant to come. The Emunah, the Nevuah Moshe, Emunah, the Torah comes from the experience of Maimon Har Sinai, not just from the knowledge of Maimon Har Sinai. Now, this, the Chayri understands, it doesn't, as much as something a person may have a certain nature to believe in something that it's built into him, that he was born with, but at the end of the day, if he never hears anything about Maimon Har Sinai, right, nobody ever tells him that there's a concept of Maimon Har Sinai, so that's not going to have any meaning to him. So obviously it has to be brought out to the point, it has to be brought out to his external self, where he can actually have the actual knowledge, the actual belief. Right? It's not just, you can't just have a belief that's deep inside your heart that they didn't know about. But you have to be able to access that belief. So what's going to be the access of the belief? So if the side of the Emunah comes from Maimad Har Sinai, not from knowing about Maimad Har Sinai, but from being by Maimad Har Sinai. So then, Adin, that the way that it gets transmitted in a more real sense to the future generations is also through an experience of Maimad Har Sinai. And how do they have an experience of Maimad Har Sinai? So I say that really all learning Torah, when a father is teaching his son Torah, or anybody who's learning Torah, that's also an extension of Maimad Har Sinai. That's a hemshech of Maimad Har Sinai. A person can experience, but refrat, or maybe only when it's given that context, means that he knows that his father also told him about Maimad Har Sinai, and he's telling him that what we're learning now is something that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Klal Yisrael heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu say directly to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he learns that with his father. He's going to experience a Maimad Har Sinai as well. It's an interesting Teres Chaim. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but Teres Chaim, just one nekuda that the Teres Chaim says, but at the end of it is asked why we make a bracha. The Berachos HaTorah, we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is noisin HaTorah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving it, so it's a present tense. We say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nosan HaTorah. So he says, and he brings that Chazal say, the Pasuk says it was Kol Gadol V'lo Yaseh. The Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu was a voice that didn't end. He says that it doesn't mean, it means when Matan Torah ended, the coil didn't end. So he goes by Riches to explain that there's the coil that came to Moshe Rabbeinu from Har Sinai, is the coil that comes to every person who learns Torah, is receiving that coil directly from Kadosh Baruch Hu. So this is an Indian that the Chazal talk about Torah Mechazeres Alachsani Shaloi. The Torah is chasing after. They find Torah chasing after somebody. The answer is that there's a coil that's coming out, and that coil will find the person who, certain people, some over there, but some of the third generation Talmud Chacham. So from then on, Torah Mechazeres Alachsani Shaloi. So in other words, the idea being that the Rambam is understanding that these psukim, Shomer L'cha, it's not going on Kol HaTorah Kula. The psukim are saying, the psukim before we're talking about the Torah, these psukim are talking about the Torah. But what's it calling the Torah? It's calling the Torah the Devarim Asher Ro'eh Einecha, the things that your eyes saw, that you directly saw. Right? That's what the Torah is, meaning it's referencing the Torah as the things that we saw, because it's saying that the teaching of the Torah needs to be an experience where the person not just hearing something in a vacuum, he's hearing something that he knows was what the Kadosh Baruch Hu communicated directly to Moshe Rabbeinu, and is as clear to him as that. And through experiencing like that, that's how he's able to access the emunah that was ingrained in him by being a descendant of somebody who was Omer al Har Sinai. So this is really the machlokes, let's say, between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Ramban is saying that in order to create emunah satira for your children and your grandchildren, you have to tell them about Maimad Har Sinai. And that's what the Psukim is saying. Tell them about Maimad Har Sinai, that they should believe in Maimad Har Sinai, educate them in Maimad Har Sinai, and then they'll have emunah. And the Rambam is saying is that the way that we create the emunah in Maimad Har Sinai is by making the learning itself, making that a hemshech of Matan Torah, making that a ke'ena Maimad Har Sinai, which is what the Chazal are telling us. It has to be the aim of your bereses of Azeh. So to learn Torah in a very serious way. It's not meant to be. Nowadays we're lazy, so we sit and we that. But I'm saying that the etzem limud Torah is a very serious thing. It's because it's the communication with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's the Koil of Har Sinai that's continuing ad hayom, and this is the way that we have to teach our children. We have to put into the chinuch that we provide, not just that we're teaching them Torah, but that we're making them understand that what we're learning, and not just for our children, for us ourselves, we have to, when we learn, we should feel also this connection to Maimad Har Sinai. And through that, we have this, and that's what allows us to be Amin Yisrael and Befrati for Shavuos, which again, Magen Avraham says is the day which we are Mekayim this Indian of Zechiras Maimad Har Sinai. Utilize Shavuos to remind us that we're learning Torah, we're learning whatever we're learning, Bula Magazel, whatever you're learning, it's all from Kadosh Baruch Hu directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. Shabbos.